ready.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we ready? Let's call this meeting to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. Call to order 9:04 a.m. Roll call. Brent Woods. Rick Bright.
Here.
Fred Knapp.
Here.
Jeff Hamstra. Ken Cawthorn.
Here.
Thomas Hayes.
Here.
We have quorum, 2 members absent.
Okay. And then we have 2 guests. Introduce yourself.
Rick Hollander, Independent Alliance of the Electrical Industry, IAI.
Okay.
Danson is Commercial Electrical Planner here at City of Tucson.
Okay. All right. So now we're on to the International Building Code. Speed.
This is Clayton Trevelyan with City of Tucson. We have posted extensive comparison documents for chapters 1 through 33 of the IBC to those comparison documents, which are posted to the website. They've been up for a couple of months now. The most significant change from the city's perspective is the change in seismic category back to seismic category C. That was of all of the changes in the IBC, that was the most significant that we identified as impacting design and construction. Although for prescriptive construction compliance, the change from B to C has little to no impact on wood braced wall framing because seismic categories A, B, and C are all in the same category for braced wall criteria. It changes once you get up to D. So there's no change to the braced wall criteria. However, it does require vertical reinforcement for masonry walls, whereas seismic category B does not. So that is the most significant change from our perspective. And I believe Pima County has already prepared proposed amendments for the IBC, which I think we've all received.
Okay. So the document from Pima County applies only to Pima County, not the City of Tucson?
The City of Tucson will have our own amendment package because we have a separate process that needs to go to mayor and council, whereas Pima County needs to go to the Board of Supervisors. But our intent is still to maintain consistency between the 2 jurisdictions. So the amendments that you see in the Pima County proposed amendments will be the same for the City of Tucson.
The only difference will probably be the city adopts the fire code, so there will be the fire code amendments in their amendment package. Since we have 25 different fire districts.
Well, I'm curious, how do the fire districts go about adopting their code?
Same way as Tucson Fire. I have given them our amendments and everything. And I got Boulder Ranch's amendments. I think I sent you guys a couple months ago. Yeah, but as close as we can, if there's something with fire that makes sense to all of you guys, we can include that in our amendments too.
Well, I guess is that necessary?
No, I'm not saying.
So Pima County adopts some fire code. Get overridden by the fire district.
As a rule, that's why we don't have any in.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on the Pima County amendments? There's just word changes in here that don't really materially affect anything.
Yeah, one of the major things I did, I forgot I changed the, I think I used the word connected versus flipped.
Right.
I just closer to industry standards. I thought that would change that. Everything in red was something that was new. There again, like I said, we added the amendments for like window and door replacements, not requiring a building permit to kind of follow along with, you guys have a policy where you don't require permits for essentially like window and door replacements, if I remember correctly, Clayton.
Correct. And the caveat to that is historic. So replacing windows in a historic protected neighborhood or building does require review.
Sure.
Okay. So a good question here on replacement of the fab coolers. That's exempt from a permit, but replacing an AC unit is not, correct?
That is correct.
What's the rationale?
Rationale has been in place for quite some time. I will also say that my understanding from that is the rating requirements for the electrical demand associated with the equipment is inevitably the same. You've got a 20 amp receptacle that feeds the evaporative cooler, and that there's very little potential for that to change with an updated piece of equipment. Replacing an air conditioner or heat pump, something of that nature, does have the potential to impact the existing electrical supply to that unit and could require an upgrade of electrical conductors, breakers, fuses, so forth.
I'll buy that. I also see the county's changed, where am I at? Page 3. Item number 9, deleting the phrase 24 inches and replacing it with 18 inches. Why with the state?
Yeah, for the pool. Yeah, that's on page 3.
Yeah, page 3 of the stuff you said, right at the top there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, IBC says 24 inches, but the state is 18 inches. So that's why it's changed.
Okay. So as a practical matter, that's not gonna have much of an impact, I would guess.
No.
Either you got a pool that's deeper or you got a splash pad that's considerably shallower. Then the other question I had is the windows are exempt from permitting. Are they required to be upgraded?
As far as energy
Yeah,
requirements,
as far as energy requirements.
well, yeah, most likely they are automatically being updated with energy requirements because they're a newer window. What we,
Oh, but you can't get windows that are an upgrade that don't meet the energy code.
true,
I would jump in and interject that there are a number of used material suppliers that provide recycled materials. However, similar to the requirements of replacing roof covering, such as shingles and things like that, the City of Tucson does not require a permit, but the code still applies. There are code provisions for roof covering, just like there are provisions for glazing and fenestration. So the code still applies, even though the City of Tucson does not require a permit to perform that work.
But this is an existing structure. So let's say I decide to replace my windows. And I don't like vinyl windows, I want an aluminum window. And it doesn't meet the current energy code, but it is an improvement over the single pane windows. Is that acceptable? Or do my replacement windows have to comply with the current code?
Your replacement windows should comply with the current code, requirements, okay? But the city of Tucson is not going to require a permit unless it's in a historic neighborhood or a historic building. So
Yeah, I think that goes true. Any of these items that don't require a permit technically are still required to comply with the code. If we're just not requiring a permit. Or
Well, there's no way to verify that after the fact. Because the labels are gone off the window. And my view is that the upgrade to a double pane extruded aluminum window that may not meet current code, it's still an improvement over what they had before.
I agree.
Right.
just,
I am agreeing with that.
and just to clarify, are you suggesting that it should no longer be exempt, that you feel like a permit should be required for replacement windows? Just want to make sure we understand it correctly.
Well, it's an interesting question. It's kind of like the old water heater question. There were a lot of water heater replacements without permits.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of window replacements without permits.
There's, I would also interject that there's a tremendous amount of work that is done that does require code compliance. Roofing is the most common.
Right.
And I bring that up because it's a fairly regular occurrence for the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services Department to be contacted by property owners needing clarification from an insurance claim on what applies and what codes apply, even though we don't require a permit. I can think of other examples such as stuccoing over an existing exterior wall. There are code criteria associated with how stucco mesh needs to be affixed to the building and how that stucco finish is applied, but we don't require a permit to stucco an existing building unless there is a change in the vapor barrier. So for example, if you pull all of the wood siding off of a house, you might be impacting, number one, the vapor barrier, and number two, you could also be impacting the structural integrity of the wall. We wouldn't recommend pulling all of the T111 off of an existing exterior wall unless the wall was somehow braced, because often that T111 is providing the structural sheathing. So there are some caveats there that we would require a permit, but only if the vapor barrier or the structural integrity of the wall is modified. Folks that want to stucco over an existing masonry wall, we don't require a permit for that, but there's still code requirements that apply to that work.
Okay. Well, the window issue is not really a life safety issue. It's an energy code.
True. But I do go back to what you said earlier, that chances are that the window is being upgraded, which is going to help the existing building be a little more energy efficient.
Right.
My thought on the window.
Yes. So, I mean, and that won't trigger, I mean, there are some bedrooms that don't meet the egress requirements.
There again, we said it like for like, so if it's the same size window that was already there, we will let them replace it with that.
So you wouldn't have to address that unless there was a change of occupancy.
The existing building code does address emergency escape and rescue opening windows in that if the existing opening does not meet the current criteria for an emergency escape rescue opening size, that the largest operable window available has to be put in there, which is to say primarily are shallow casement windows where only one section of the glazing opens, and it's a casement style. Oftentimes we would require that is changed out to a slider to increase the size of the opening to get us to as close to the criteria for an emergency escape rescue opening. And that's actually spelled out in the existing building code.
As I recall, they reduced the total area to 4 square feet as opposed to 5.7.
That sounds familiar. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we can.
Yeah, they reduced the area. It's 4 square feet.
Hmm.
On an existing window. I guess if you're motivated enough, that's enough. So, section 112.1.1, service conductors. So we check with Dennis to make sure we're not running afoul of TEP. This is on page 5 of the
Are we in the city or county?
county. It's on page 5, section 112.1.1, service conductors.
That seems to be in sync with the city's amendment, which has been longstanding in the city. I wasn't aware the county had that requirement previously. Is that new?
No, I think it's been in there a while.
Well, this right above it says add new section.
Well, yeah, but it was always gonna add a new section, even before the difference would have been, I don't remember.
I guess I remember more in the past there being a common document and it said like city only had that requirement. Nevertheless, I don't think it's an issue with Tucson Electric Power, although I know that TEP considers themselves to be an overhead utility. But the way their standards and practices are put together, essentially they can provide underground service to anybody that requests it. Sometimes that does require additional costs compared to overhead.
Yeah, so if TP was inclined to do an overhead and you wanted it underground, you'd have to pay the additional.
Yeah,
cost.
but ordinarily what TEP does is they trade off the customer building, what they call the civil system, which is the underground conduits, concrete pads and such, and the trenching for all that. So if the customer pays to put that in per TEP specs and their design, then essentially the title to that equipment turns over to TEP. They put their underground wires in it and they don't charge any extra than to go underground. There is a difference in commercial with 3-phase power. You're underground, you generally would have to, customer pays for the wiring all the way to the point of connection at TEP, which could be a pole if there's overhead transformers, or it could be the terminals of the pad mount transformer, which sometimes is some distance away from buildings. So there can be significant costs for those conductors to be underground compared to overhead. But virtually all new subdivisions and new developments are putting in underground power, within the development. So, whether it's in the code or not, it's likely to happen on new. So these rules more affect like infill type projects where there's a vacant lot someplace on a block, and then you have to make a decision. Can that be, is it required to be underground or could it be overhead?
Right.
Interestingly enough, I've done many projects where we've converted underground to be overhead, but they've been in old neighborhoods where others on the block are overhead. This particular building was underground. They needed a service upgrade, maybe bigger than TEP can do with underground construction. So then they put the overhead in. So I know the goal is to get rid of all this overhead stuff, but it's still not happening.
I'm trying to remember back to my contracting days. I think there was a rule in there that said if there was a certain percentage overhead, that's what the utility looked at. So.
Well, it's actually in the proposed ordinance. If you have, it says where there's 3 or fewer abutting lots making up less than 40% of the acreage, or where the vacant area, that's an exception. So if you can prove that there's that certain percentage, then you're allowed on your new project to take the overhead.
That's what I was remembering. Thank you.
Okay. One thing, on page 7, section 1612.3. It says insert name of jurisdiction. Did you want to insert the name of the jurisdiction there.
Which one was that?
1612.3.
1612.3. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I will do that. Pima County. Hey, and I looked on the service conductors, that same amendment was in the 2012 and the 2018. IBC.
Okay.
So,
Nothing's really changed.
Just it says how long it's been since I looked at it.
Exactly.
And just as a point of clarification, at the beginning of each amendment, proposed amendment, there's a qualifying statement. So the add new section is actually part of the legalese, as it were, on how that code is being modified. Are we adding new language? Are we deleting language? Are we revising language? So you're going to see that statement or prefix on every single amendment to preface what type of a change it is. And that's going to be consistent through both Pima County and City of Tucson.
actually, Rick, in that one, it is insert name and jurisdiction as the flood insurance study of unincorporated areas of Pima County, Arizona. So that wouldn't be Pima, that is inserted with, that's our regional flood controls.
I mean, that's basically a formatting.
Yeah.
Issue. Okay. Any other comments on the county amendments?
The item for discussion, that was 607.6.1 about the dryer vents on page 6. So my thought there is, I think the 607, that's actually for the IMC portion, which is the same as the, I think, 17.6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be, yeah.
Yeah. So my thought there is I think that all kind of got clarified by us just adding the, or floor ceiling assembly in there, because what we were trying to say is as ducts go through that top plate, the floor above may not line up, if they're trying to go up to the floor. And so they may have to offset, or if they have to, or if it's better to just go to the exterior wall, if it's, short enough, however they want to do it, is that acceptable to go horizontally within the floor ceiling assembly? And that's what I think we were trying to clarify is that acceptable? And my thought is that I think it's because once it goes, let's say it goes through the floor ceiling assembly and now it's in the second floor, it's only protected by a 1/2 inch drywall. And so my thought is once it's up in that ceiling assembly and exposed, whether it goes straight up or goes horizontally, there's no difference. And so my thought is that we either say you need to protect it or you don't need to protect it. And I have the preference that it doesn't need to be protected because it's essentially is protected being in that assembly. So that's kind of my thoughts. So it can go horizontal because if it'd be the same as it going vertical to me. And so I just didn't have any, and I think that's how so the paragraph above that, by us adding or floor ceiling assembly, it's basically saying so long as it's in the wall or floor ceiling assembly, it's okay. It doesn't need a damper. It just needs to be, sealed when it penetrates in there. And so it can offset, it could travel, 30 feet or whatever and penetrate the exterior wall, or travel 30 feet and go up another floor ceiling within another wall cavity. But so long as it's always within those cavities, I thought it was essentially okay. And I guess that's what I wanted to. My thought is that that paragraph above kind of takes care of all that.
Yeah, but what about number 5 here? It talks around and horizontal shall be located below the fire.
So long as they go in through the wall and then up into the ceiling assembly from within the wall cavity, then I think it's meeting, then it could go horizontal. That's my
Well, that's-
thoughts.
That's not the way I read that.
Well, that's,
So-
yeah, that was what he was saying, is this is just up for discussion.
Right.
And I'm saying that it would all be scratched out because it's kind of addressed in that first part. Because that first part, basically, that first exception says the duct shall be contained within the cavity of the wall, and then we added, or fire rated assembly, and shall be constructed of steel, and, and went on from there. So I think that kind of says, so long as you're within the wall or floor ceiling assembly, you don't need to have the damper. You could route it. We don't say it shall be vertical or horizontal or anything. We just say it shall be in those cavities. So that, I would say that all this would not need to be,
All the blue, just.
yeah,
get rid of all the blue.
that whole discussion could just be removed. So long as it's okay with everybody to route it. As long as you're within the cavity or the wall assembly, you could route it however you want to route it. Okay.
And the city would support that as long as it stays within a fire rated assembly to the extent that the wall is a rated assembly with its gypsum protection.
Right.
So, of greater concern would be the quantity of offsets and the distance based on, the ability to meet the criteria for the maximum number of
For dryers.
changes of
Yeah,
direction
for
for
dryers.
dryer bed.
Right. Because you also have ceiling exhaust fans. Those are basically going to, right? Ceiling exhaust fans and, or outside air intakes. Ceiling exhaust fans, outside air intakes, and dryer vents are basically the only 4-inch ducts that I can think of. I doubt that they'd run a supply air up in there. There's no reason to, so, yeah. So anyway, so my thought is all 3 of those still meet all that criteria of 1761 with that exception 1, and not have to add any of this additional
Okay,
exception 6.
yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, and that would go the same with on the mechanical.
Okay.
Based
Parallel language there.
Based on this recommendation, we'll prepare a new amendment proposal and distribute it to the group for both the
Sure.
IMC and the IBC.
Okay. The rest of it, like I said, it was just that, and I know you wrote in there, which was good, new for discussion, right?
Yeah, sure. Yes, we do. Any other comments?
I'm sure we need a structural to tell us about chapter 16 stuff, right?
Yeah, well, like Clayton said, it was the seismic zone changed. I don't know that we have a legitimate argument since the geological folks are the ones that redrew the map.
This is Clayton. I will say that all of the commentary associated with the IBC changes to the structural provisions are directly associated with the changes to the ASCE 7. So it's more of providing a consistent language between the ICC and the ASCE so that they don't conflict.
So
Well, and what I can do too is, Brent actually starts with us next Monday, so I can get with him on chapter 16, before the next meeting. And if there's something he thought should be incorporated, even though he's not part of the code committee anymore,
Well, what's the effect, what's his effective date of resignation? That be prior Friday when he sent the email?
Would be Friday.
Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna take a little bit for the engineers to get together and find something. Nothing else on the building code. Just have to make those revisions and we'll move on to the next item. The existing. Have any comments on the building code changes? Here again, there are a ton of new definitions in the existing building code. Kind of hard to evaluate because clearly they're trying to address some issues where there's some gaps, but how it actually impacts the actual implementation of the code.
Right.
It's a guess at this point.
Right, unless you're, and I know that, you know, we always turn to experts that are IEBC experts usually, you know, to help us out with stuff like that too, because it's a small code, but it is, and I think that's why they're adding all the definitions, because everybody created their own. And this is what was, I think, happening.
Some of these are unclear to me. I don't know how they get applied practically, like 306.2.1. Prohibited reduction in accessibility. I've read that 3 times. I'm not quite sure how that will apply, but here again, it's one of those things where it's gonna have to be implemented. Figure out exactly what it is, because every remodel is a little bit different. So when we start applying this to each specific project, it can change a bit. So one of the exemptions is be able to alter a type A to a type B on individually owned units. So if you had an apartment project with a type A unit and they conduit it, they could revise that to a type B unit if they did a model. Like stairs.
Is there a code section?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, 6, 7.
section 306.7.3, alteration of type A units. The alteration to type A individually owned dwelling units within a group R2 shall be permitted to meet the provisions for a type B dwelling. But it can't be an apartment, it has to be like a townhouse or a condominium where it's individually owned. Which would make it no different than a single family house.
So this is Clayton with the city. I believe the changes to section 306.7 that removed the exemptions from this section were to create individual sections, subsections below 3.6.7.1, 0.3, 0.4, so on and so forth. In a type A, type B units, I believe is directly addressed in 306.7.3. Specifically, the alteration to a type A individual owned dwelling unit within a group R2 occupancy shall be permitted to be the provision for type B dwelling unit.
Okay. So that basically means you build an apartment complex, you have a type A unit, you conduit it, now it's individually owned, they could remodel that bathroom to be a type B.
Correct.
Which puts it on par with a single family house. Am I reading it right?
That is, I would say that's an accurate interpretation. Yes, sir.
Okay. But the key is it has to be individually owned.
Correct.
It looks like they've added adult changing stations. It's only for like assembly occupancy with a certain number of people. It has to be in a family bathroom, adult changing. So for those, you know, assembly uses with a lot of people, that's gonna be really significant. The question I had was 502.2 flood hazard areas. There's some criteria here, which I don't have a problem with, but does it conflict with the FEMA requirements?
Good question, Rick. At least for the county, I'll check with RFCD.
FEMA says you can only do so much. Yeah, I just don't want people to rely on this and then find out they're in violation of the FEMA standards. See, these high occupancies are gonna cause some confusion. I was not familiar with it. 506.4, that's where they went to the 4 square feet. 5.7. The other question was 705.2 roof replacement. This says you have to go down, remove the roofing. Unless you have a soffit here at underlayment. So if I had an apartment building with a shingle roof on it, asphalt shingles. According to this, you couldn't put a second layer over that unless you stripped it down to the sheathing.
This is Clayton, I was of the impression 2 layers were permitted, but a 3rd was not.
Okay, but this is talking about stripping it down to the decking unless you've got a soffit here at underlayment.
Which would constitute an extreme modification to the existing elements because it's directly adhered. What is, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but this says if I got 1 layer of shingles on a building and it's time to replace the shingles, I gotta strip it down to the sheathing as opposed to shingling over the existing roof.
I think I'll have to look at that one some more. I'm not quite following. And so I'd need to look into that a little bit more. Apologies for not having a direct answer for you.
Okay, well, they confused me too, so.
I'll look at it some more too, but or is this just saying a roof replacement essentially can include removing coverings down to the roof deck? Not necessarily saying that you have to.
And they're mechanically fastened, the shingles are, so why would it matter if it's soffit here?
Well, what I'm reading is if you have shingles, then they're not soffit here. Right? When you can't put a second layer of shingles over that. You have to strip it down to the decking and reshingle. I mean, I think that's good practice, but that's not rocket metal requirement.
My initial response to that is I think you might be digging a little bit too deep, only because the first few words of the code section state where the existing roof includes one layer of self-adhered. So if it's not self-adhered, that code section wouldn't apply. But that's where I want to make sure to dig down just a little bit deeper. That prefacing few words there would dictate which type of application it would apply to. So
So
if the first layer is self-adhered, then that code section applies, but you're describing a shingle situation, which is usually mechanically fastened.
What about
yeah.
one level higher? It's roof replacement. Is adding a second layer of shingles roof replacement.
and what's self-adhered, because asphalt shingles are self-adhered to the shingle below it.
Right.
It's also nailed. So as a shingle, a typical 3-tab shingle, is that considered self-adhered?
We'll make a note and get you a response for next time.
Because you could argue that's self-adhered, because I have them.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions, concerns? My biggest problem is all these new definitions and how that's going to, and reading them, and I have no idea how that's going to impact. I'm sure it's gonna raise a lot of questions. Back here again in 3 years, fixing those. That's just the nature of writing code. Do your best, but you can't anticipate everything. No other comments? I'm curious, how many people use the existing building code when they do a renovation?
So, I mean, on my side, the only time I really get into it is on these, either, well, on a major renovation, usually on the housing is what because of what's been going on with the housing shortage, and so we've been doing a lot of that, where they are either doing a major renovation to an apartment building, or they're doing a conversion from a hotel motel to apartments.
Okay.
And that's when we've been relying heavily on that IUPC. That's what, at least office stuff, unless they're doing huge renovations, I haven't seen.
Well, I think people start with the building code, and then if they run into too many issues, they move on to the existing building code.
Right.
And I'm curious as to how often that happens.
I would say for the county, it is used, but it's not a huge,
It's pretty rare.
it's rare. Yeah. Typically, they're using the IPC.
And my experience with the city plan review is it is used less frequently, most often, from my opinion, from a lack of understanding of the existing building code, right? Because not as many designers are familiar with using it, and it winds up becoming a bit of an alternative so that we can, meet their intent, because they're having difficulty meeting plan review comments, and so we migrate over to the existing building code to assist in getting their permit approved.
Yeah, they use the code they're familiar with until they get stuck.
Right.
They're forced to use it. Yeah. Okay. Last chance, any other comments? Okay. We'll go to the swimming pool and spa code. Any comments on that?
From the City of Tucson's perspective, we support all of the revised proposed language as presented in the Pima County amendments. Again, working towards consistency. My only comment is a change to the language that we've had previously for quite some time related to pool covers. So the requirement for swimming pool covers specifically says to language to prevent evaporation. And I would just suggest that we change the word prevent to limit, because pool cover doesn't entirely prevent evaporation. And the intent is really to limit it. So we've used prevent for quite some time, but I'm not sure that's the best word. So that would be my only suggestion for the changes to our existing.
I support that change. I thought that was a good point.
So, do I understand this correctly? This only applies to private pools?
Yes, residential,
Right.
residential 1 and 2 family pools.
So you have semi-public and public pools. They would
Which-
have to comply with the state.
Correct.
And that's why, yeah, you're deleting
That's why chapter
4,
yes.
Right.
and 5.
So we still don't have any splash pad requirements.
No, but next week, I don't know if Lonnie's reached out to you, Clayton. I've been asked to attend a meeting with Consumer Food and Health Safety. And I think she's inviting Clayton to discuss the semi-public pool code, and maybe how to even streamline the process a little bit for those that apply for them. And I want to bring up the splash pad because I've been asking about that since we had to start doing the plan.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a couple of splash pads over the years, and the permitting process has been all over the place. This last one, we submitted to the health department. They really didn't review anything, they just took our money. And then we had to submit to the City of Tucson under the swimming pool code, and they issued it. And that the health department issued a certificate not having once set foot on site. They gave us a certificate that we were good to go.
Well, that's
So I mean, there are a lot of questions on,
Yeah.
should they? Maybe they don't need to inspect it. I would think they would, but.
Hey.
I mean, they're getting more and more popular.
Oh, yeah, they're popping up everywhere.
Yeah, they're more expensive than a pool, but in terms of operation, they're a lot simpler on those issues.
So in the electrical code, they have now addressed splash pads in the pool and fountain article. And so the equal potential grid is now required to be installed. It also makes a requirement to have the ground fault circuit interrupter protection and other things of that nature that would be required for a swimming or wading pool. Now, those types of things apply to splash pads as well.
Okay.
So that's in the 2023 NEC.
Cool.
I'm just surprised we've gone this long without addressing splash pads. Has it been around for what, 15 years?
They've been around longer than that. When I grew up as a little kid in Colorado, Aspen had one when I was like 9 years old. They had a splash pad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they've been around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
So they're just, like you said, they're becoming much more popular.
Right. Well, I know from my client who does a lot of apartments, even though splash pads cost more in terms of maintenance, and somebody goes to a pool and they break a glass bottle that requires draining the entire pool. I mean, so in terms of maintenance and operation of splash pad, even though it's more cost up front, it's much easier and less expensive to operate. And every time I submit one, it's like a whole new experience.
Want to keep you guessing, Rick.
You're doing a good job. So, at least the electrical's addressed, that's probably the biggest,
That's good.
biggest thing.
The bonding ring is a relief to me. Seems like there's a greater potential for shock hazard without it, so. From the city's perspective, we're glad the electrical code finally addressed it.
Yeah, the process though is interesting because most of the time, when I work on project, the swimming pool, I don't design any of the electrical that's directly associated with that swimming pool. We bring power to the pool equipment, room or yard, and then it's a separate permit for the pool and nobody hires us to be electrical engineers for that. Now, I've worked on a few projects for Parks and Rec with splash pads, and those, even under the old electrical code, we put the equal potential grid in. It just seemed like the proper thing to do, but I don't know if that's a generalized practice now or not.
Well, without the written code, it's
May
hard for
not,
people.
may not be happening.
It may not be, yeah. I mean, a lot of people rely on the codes to tell them what the minimum requirements are. When you don't have a code, tell them what the minimum requirements are. Who knows what you get? Not yet.
Yes, the code says it's not a design manual. It does get used that way.
Well, but people do use it to guide their projects. Any other comments? Because I don't think this has changed. Just changed the 18 and 24-inch requirement for a pool.
To match state definition.
Right.
They changed the sections. I did find a link to RWRD's draining of the pool. In discussions with Clayton, we came up with some stuff. If you're gonna drain it on your lot, that was a change from the 2018. That's all part in red. Section 321.1. But no, other than that, it's pretty much the same.
We have engaged the Department of Transportation Mobility to ensure consistency with draining a pool in a public right of way. So we've heard a response from DTM, and the current approach is not to include all of their recommendations into our amendments just because of the length of it, but rather to create a separate policy associated with draining a pool and then reference that from our amendments to make sure that discharges in a public right of way meet that criteria for stormwater protection.
You know, that needs to be addressed. The first splash pad we did, there was a big concern on access for emergency, you know, get the gurneys in and out. That seems to go away.
On the pools.
Yeah, because when we do a splash pad, we have a little seawall.
Oh, as far as the splash pad goes.
As far as the
yeah.
splash pad, and the first time we did it, they wanted access outside of that
They
seawall,
wanted the 5 foot deck.
even though they could stick the gurney right in the middle of the splash pad.
Yeah.
A lot of questions, a lot of back and forth, and in terms of the design requirements, it'd be nice to get it nailed down, so. Okay,
You know, I'm not advocating any change to the code. It does seem with respect to pools, there's a lot of water use relating to maintaining a pool, backwashing a pool, and periodic replacement of the pool water. And it seems like these rules do allow the discharge into sanitary sewer, which then ultimately becomes the reclaimed water, which reduces the impact on you know, our potable water system. So I don't know if anybody's looking at that, but I mean, in many cases, you could have a situation where sewer piping could be close by to a pool and, you know, to encourage to have a fixture available that the backwash water and pump down water could be put into. And again, I hate to impact more costs on every project, but it does, you know, looking long-term on our water availability, you know, here, seems like that's something that people ought to be looking at.
And that is addressed in some of the language that we received from us, the stormwater team. And I will say that the one aspect to that is the quality of the water. That you know, if it was visibly green, for example, or apparently you know, ridden with algae, things of that nature, that it might need to be shocked with chlorine or treated before it's discharged.
Can you raise your hand?
I found in the NEC, the 23, they've now added the definitions at the beginning, splash pad. A fountain intended for recreational use by pedestrians and designed to contain no more than 25 millimeters, 1 inch of water depth. This definition does not include showers intended for hygienic rinsing prior to use of pool, spa, or the water feature. So it falls under fountains in the 23, as Dennis was pointing out.
And then there are some technical requirements therein that address, say, the equipotential grounding.
Yes,
And because it's generalized now within the article, it would also mean that like the GFCI requirements would all that are in that article are gonna apply.
correct. So the NEC is addressing it now.
But prior, it wasn't.
No,
Right. Any other comments on the pool code? Okay. Move on to the residential code.
Related to the residential code and the energy code still has not been released. Last I heard, it would be released the 19th of July. So we're still well over a week away from that, in which case the final version of the residential code would be released. Our next comparison document to help support your understanding the changes is the residential code, so that should be coming out soon.
So you've seen the 19th is what you heard?
That was the latest, yeah.
Cause I keep looking and all I found something that said the fall. You know, oh my gosh. Okay.
Also, I haven't seen an official memorandum or
No.
news item from the ICC
Nothing.
designating what date. It's really
At this point, do you expect
Discussion.
to commit to a date?
I'm crossing my fingers. We'll see it on the 19th.
So we'll just skip the residential code and the energy code, right?
Right.
Go on to the national electric code. Dennis gave us a little handout, so I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, so I did give everybody the essentially a one-page markup that I did on our 2017 NEC amendments as to whether they're still applicable and if they need any adjustments. And then I also had a couple of new items. And we don't have a whole lot of amendments to the NEC as existing. But the first one we have was section 210.5, identification for branch service. The basic code requirement in the NEC is that when you have more than one voltage electrical system in a building, you then have to identify those different systems. And then it allows multiple means that you can make that identification. But in Tucson and Pima County, we've had a longstanding practice, and I believe it's been in the code for over 30 years now, to actually require color coding of the circuit conductors for branch circuits. And that's amendment was through the 2017 NEC. And I would advocate that we continue that as it is the practice here. And this is more stringent than the requirement that's in the basic NEC. But given that it's a longstanding practice, I have not heard any feedback from either users, contractors, whomever, that this poses an unusual hardship upon construction. So again, I would advocate continuing. However, it may be a good idea to have a few modifications compared to the previous amendment, which I scratched out and wrote in. Instead of saying ungrounded conductors, I said circuit conductors. And the reason is that in our color code, we also say grounded conductors shall be white, gray, and white. And so if we title it ungrounded conductors, then it's a bit illogical having a column for grounded conductor. Now, that is not strictly necessary because Article 200 of the code talks about grounded conductors and does give some sort of the same color coding, in that the basic color to use is white. And then if you have the two voltages, you have to use different. But again, standardizing is what we've been doing in the past, and we think we should continue. So the only other thing in exception number 3, we previously had the word acceptable. From a code definition point of view, I think approved is a better word, which means it's acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction. So I scratched out acceptable and put approved in. The second local amendment that we had was to add section 210.11C. And that was permission to put dishwashers and garbage disposers on the same 20 amp branch circuit. Again, that's been a long-standing amendment. Prior to having that, there was on occasion some pushback from plan reviewers wanting separate circuits for those. I've never heard any negative feedback of problems when this practice has happened. And I will note that new appliances tend to use less power than the older ones did. So I would advocate continuing it, just as I think it's a nice thing to do. So this being in the NEC, it's really only addressing multifamily dwelling units. But when we get to the IRC, we would have a similar there for the one family and duplexes. We had an amendment that previously was Article 225.32, but now it really applies to 225.31B, which is the same section that needed the exception. And the reason for that is that the basic rule is that anytime you have a building or structure and you feed it wire externally from another source, you would have to have a disconnecting means. And if you took the most literal interpretation of that, that would mean like every pole light in the parking lot would need to have a disconnect switch on it. And so previously, this got debated a lot we had just an electrical code committee. And at that time, we felt that it was unnecessary to have that much, that many disconnects, and that in some cases that could actually introduce not an electrical hazard, but a hazard to people if someone maliciously were to operate those disconnects in a parking lot and turn lights off and things. So that's why we had the amendment. I would advocate continuing the amendment. What we have to do now is just address the proper code section because the NEC renumbered it.
Did they renumber the conductors sizing, or that stayed the same? That's just referencing.
Oh, the reference to 250.22, no, that's referencing a grounding section, and I think that's still the same. It was just in Article 225, for some reason, it got bumped up to 31 instead of 32, and then there was 2 parts of 31, so it's the B part now. Let's see, section 230.70B, marking. So there's already a basic code requirement that service disconnect switches have to be marked, and the code even says permanently marked. But there was a longstanding concern about, because of our severe heat and people using other marking means like glued-on nameplates and such were failing. So this amendment went in our electrical code a long time. I think it's been around for over 30 years. And some of that is driven by Tucson Electric Power Company. They actually require a raised letter metal label that is permanently riveted to a meter socket, for example. But it doesn't necessarily apply to a service disconnect switch. This would apply it to the service disconnect switch as well. And I would advocate retaining the amendment, although the basic code rules are not without some force in it, because they do say it has to be suitable for the environment. So if we were really trying to get rid of amendments, I suppose we could, but I don't really advocate that. The next section is 340.10, which is for UF cable. That's the gray jacketed cable type wiring that is fundamentally used for direct burial underground. But it can also be installed the same as non-metallic sheath cable for wiring inside buildings, and occasionally gets used that way. We've had this long-standing amendment to permit it to be used in the mortar joints of adobe construction that would allow feeding electrical outlets within the adobe walls without having to snake conduit into those walls, which is a pretty good hardship. Section 340.10 in the NEC, they omitted a previous numbered use permitted, which was for solar systems. That got omitted, so this now has to be subsection 7 instead of subsection 8. Again, I would advocate maintaining that practice. I'm not aware of any particular problems that we've had in built work, although I do see Dan's got a comment.
You have cable, the limitations to bending radius is 5 times the diameter of the cable, and it would be hard to achieve that in the mortar joint. Because if it's U of cable is approximately 1/2 inch at the widest point, so it'd be 5 times that, which would be 2.5 inches, and mortar joints are less than that. How would you bend it around a mortar joint and still meet code compliance for bending radius?
So in most cases where I've seen this apply, they've been 2-wire UF cable, which tends to be built as a flat style cable rather than round style cable. And as long as it's bent on the flat edge, the bending radius would be tighter. I don't.
And that's true, but the way the verbiage is on the code, it says it refers to the widest point to be used as the measurement for bending radius.
Go ahead.
New wording for the 23 under 340.24 bedding radius. They've now added for flat cables, the major diameter dimension of the cables shall be used to determine the bedding
What's the
radius.
region? What's the widest point?
So I think then the more fundamental question is, I understand the NEC then has changed that definition of the diameter of the cable. But we instituted this practice really decades ago. There haven't been any fundamental changes in UF cable construction. If anything, the materials used nowadays are better than previous materials. I'm not certain, as I said, I haven't heard of any particular problem, but I can think that the constructability of an adobe structure could be really impacted having to stake a conduit type wiring system to feed outlets. And that becomes a hardship on people wanting to use adobe type construction. And do we want to take this away from those people that want to continue with that type of construction? And that's what we'll end up doing if we drop our amendment. So I think that's what we need to consider as a committee.
Good point.
This is Clayton. My suggestion would be to encourage the committee to maintain these amendments as they provide a certain amount of clarity to our applicants. And that clarity removes the ambiguity that they can experience should they encounter more than one staff member, right? It's not uncommon for folks to complain that, you know, they talk to one inspector and then they get a different answer from another inspector. And so this clarity does, I believe, help our applicants tremendously. So perhaps we could also consider additional language in this specific amendment to address the bending radius to make sure that we're not, you know, damaging those conductors while still meeting the intent.
Yeah, if we quantify that though, I think we have to use what's in the NEC. Yeah.
Well, you brought up a good point. I mean, we don't have any statistics of any problems in the past by allowing that. But then where do you draw the line? Because on the same point, we're wanting to amend the ambient temperatures. Where has there been problems with that in the past?
I hear you.
This is Dan. I agree with Dennis. I believe that amendment was in the NEC when I started 20-some years ago. So we've allowed it for a long time and haven't had any issues with that. The UF cable, so I think that one we should probably keep. Also.
Yeah, it may be that the use of Adobe isn't very prevalent as much as it was before, but still from time to time.
Yeah, time to time we still get one.
Unlike doing wiring like in CMU where you've got voids in the block where you can run your conduits, you don't really have that with Adobe, so it's a lot tougher to.
They can always chip it out with a little basin hammer, make a little, notch in it.
Yeah,
Pretty easy.
and you can do that, but on the other hand, the labor is like the most expensive thing on jobs nowadays, and that's, it's not just cost of material, it's all that labor, and it seems like skilled labor is in such a demand, and so I don't know, I guess I feel since we've had the amendment for so long, it's worth continuing. But I mean, we need input from other committee members, and they can, because the committee can make that decision.
I agree with you, and I just wanted to bring it up because the wording changed. There may be some legal repercussion, maybe not. Just wanted to make you aware of it.
Well, I mean, when it comes to that, you look at the NEC itself, and the NFPA says that everything in it is entirely recommendation on the NFPA's part, and it carries no legal obligation until it's actually adopted by a jurisdiction. So, is there any legal burden on the city or county if we have an amendment that changes the NEC? I'm not sure there is. Anybody can write a code, but it's the work we're doing now is what actually makes it a legal thing. Let's see. Then there were two other items which I'm suggesting that we may want to consider, and the first one is it correlates with the long-standing amendment that we've had in 210.5 that says identification for branch circuits. Well, there's also a similar section in Article 215 for feeders. And I don't recall why we didn't have an amendment previously for feeders. The ongoing practice, though, seems to be that feeders are identified the same way branch circuits are. Generally, large feeder conductors are put in it with color banding, and the small gauge conductors, they use colored insulation on the feeders. And to be consistent in our amendments, I think that means we should add a section, or we should do what I'm suggesting here, revise that section to 15.12, deleting the C1 subparagraphs and replacing it with content that would be similar to what we have for the 210.5 C1. I think the content could exactly be the same. So that would be my recommendation, to be consistent between the feeder section and the branch circuit section. The last is entirely my opinion that we should add some clarification to section 310.15 B3, which states that we have to adjust the ampacity of our wiring in accordance with the ambient temperature where it's installed. And it provides a formula on how to calculate that, and it also references tables that provide an adjustment factor so that you don't load wiring as heavily when it's installed in a high temperature environment. But it doesn't give any guidance as to what those temperatures are, so it's entirely up to the designer to make that decision. And my opinion is that given the fact that in many cases there is wiring that's installed 100% outdoors, that those adjustment factors should be applied, but then someone has to make a decision, well, what is the outdoor ambient temperature? And we've got other codes that specify what design temperatures are for certain things like sizing air conditioning systems. And I think it would be appropriate to use to provide that guidance in the code. And I believe the proper number would be based on ASHRAE's design temperature for cooling, which is in the range between 105 and 130 Fahrenheit. I just picked the highest number within that range, which is a single line in the tables that gives an ampacity adjustment. And that's why I picked that. There's one other section in the code talking about ambient temperatures, and it has a fine print note addressing that ASHRAE as being a source for an ambient temperature. Interestingly, though, it's not this section. That's where that came from. So my suggestion would be that I think it'd be a good idea to add that amendment given our local conditions of high outdoor temperatures. that's where I'm at with it. I don't recommend any other amendments to the code, although I will say there have been a huge number of changes in the NEC, just from front to back. And who knows about unintended consequences of some of those, and some of them are a little bit confusing to read. I could go into those next time if people are interested, but I don't feel like I'm in a position to want to offer any other amendments. I will note that we have, then I'll get to Rick, that Rick had separately submitted some suggested amendments, and those can be reviewed also.
Well, my question is, since these aren't on the agenda, can we discuss them or should we wait till the next meeting?
So this is Clayton. I provided the committee members with 3 supplemental documents in preparation for the next meeting because we didn't have those ready in time. So I can go ahead and address those now just to kind of preface the next meeting. The first is the required cooling code that you've heard about, that we've been proposing to the ICC to get into the 2027 code cycle. As you know, we made a testimony in the spring code committee action hearings to the ICC in Orlando. We received as a working group that the city of Tucson's participated in a number of comments related to that proposal. And then, over the past few months, we've been working to refine that code language. So that revised code language that's going to be heard at the second committee action hearings in October was just submitted yesterday. So that new language is in your document. The primary reason for updating you on that proposal is Pima County has added that required cooling amendment, which has not been in Pima County's code before. So as we refine down that code proposal that's going to ICC, we just want to make sure that you're up to date on all of the revisions that occur with that proposed language. So that's in your packet.
So just for
Yep.
clarification,
Go ahead.
ICC is looking at this for the next code cycle.
2027 IMC.
But you're proposing this change to our code in the 2024.
So there is the code that you see that's being proposed to the ICC is already in the City of Tucson's property maintenance code. So it's already on the City of Tucson books, just not in our building code amendments. So this work that we're doing is to provide consistency with language that the City of Phoenix already has, the City of Miami-Dade, and Los Angeles County. And so basically what we're doing is we're combining the language from those 4 major jurisdictions so that we can provide some consistent language to propose to the ICC. So to be specific, it's already on the City of Tucson's books. It's just not in the building codes. It's in the neighborhood preservation code.
What's the temperature value in that?
For the City of
That's it?
Tucson,
Yeah, that's already
it's 82.
82.
So, and then it starts out by saying, interior spaces, in section 309.2, there's interior spaces, but it looks like you're proposing that it's just say dwelling units and sleeping units. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that was directly related to some of the comments that we heard in Orlando, requesting for clarification in narrowing what the scope is.
Right.
But the current requirements that are in Phoenix, in Miami, and LA, and City of Tucson specifically apply to dwelling units. So we're not proposing that it at this point go any further than that. So we added charging language at the very beginning of the revised section to specifically apply to dwelling units and sleeping units to pretty much exempt all other occupancies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it would be challenging to meet this. Well, you probably can't, but I mean, like, for instance, I'm thinking of, you know, Jiffy Lubes and those places, where the doors are always wide open, you know, so. Is that an occupied, it would be an occupied space, but it would not be the dwelling units, so that would help clarify that.
And feedback on that, I will say that I know some folks that work at Costco, and they now say that the tire center is the best place to work because they force the doors to be closed to keep the air conditioner on. Because when they upgraded their mechanical system, we required them to have a interconnect to disconnect or to turn off the AC when they open the door. So it's the first thing that techs do. As soon as they get the card and they shut the doors, the AC kicks back on. And they say it's drastically improved their work environment. So
Right. It's the same as kitchens. I mean, we're converting kitchens all the time because right now people are this time of year passing out, you know, getting terribly sick because it's just a horrible environment. But the problem would be is you're not, with the way what you're proposing is you wouldn't be addressing that because you're just still saying dwelling sleeping units.
And I will say that the working group that has been assembled to help propose this amendment has been focused on dwelling units. That was basically our goal as a working group. And rather than trying to expand it, right, that we're trying to achieve our first goal.
Right.
Next year, 2025 cycle includes the building code, the residential code, and the property maintenance code, which are not included in this cycle. So we're using the IMC as basically a stepping stone to get as many comments and potential objections in preparation for those additional code cycles that happen next year.
So are you recommending then at this point that for the 2024 IMC requirements that we stick with just saying dwelling and sleeping units, right? Because we just haven't fine-tuned it enough. Right? Your committee hasn't fine-tuned it enough to determine what to do yet.
That's just beyond the scope of our committee's work at this point.
Got it.
So, question on applying this. So you say dwelling units. Does that mean every room in the dwelling unit would have to be able to maintain that temperature?
Every habitable room in the dwelling unit. So kitchens, bathrooms, garages don't apply. But bedrooms, living room, I think so too.
Yeah, I'm relating to how I grew up in Tucson. My folks built a new house when I was a very young kid. And it was a 2-story house built in the hill. And when it was originally built, only half of the area had air conditioning installed, and the other half had no mechanical equipment whatsoever. And we lived in that house for a long time that way. And we were fine because, well, we had the air conditioning in the bedrooms, we had in the living room and such, but there were other parts of the house that simply were not, but it didn't matter. We did use those all the time. But I read the ordinance now, and that would have to, because those rooms, one would call a recreation room, it's like a second living room, that would have had to have air conditioning. And there were other rooms that, well, I guess you could call them a storage room, but one ended up being a bedroom. When it was, then it added air conditioning to it. But my point is that sometimes people can't afford to build all this, and do you really want to say it has to be everything in that first shot, or do we have a minimum level that we have to do? And that's what we should codify. People can always do more and do better, but should we, we keep hearing cost of housing is so high, and are we overreaching? It's my only comment.
I mean, I tend to think, achieving 85 with a ceiling fan is That's still very, very warm. I can't imagine, I mean, I don't see how that would be pretty simple to do with evac cooling. And for a dwelling. It would be harder for a shop, for instance, an auto shop, where you've got hot engines and a lot of people and lights and everything else. I think for dwelling units, it is achievable. So I think we're giving them that option for a lower cost option, but at least needing to get to 85 degrees. I don't know, with the heat waves we've been going and all that, I think something should be required. And it should be in the IMC rather than hidden in some neighborhood section, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's where you're designing your HVAC system.
Right.
From the HVAC.
Right.
So, for the committee's consideration, we would recommend that we move it from the property or the neighborhood preservation into the IMC to be consistent and like a step forward of the process that we're pushing before the ICC. But to the comment of how many rooms need to be cooled, I will say that it's of note that the state of Arizona only requires one room of dwelling units to be cooled. The city of Tucson took that one step forward and said all habitable rooms. So we as a municipality, we've already taken that step a little bit beyond the state, which says you only have to cool one room.
But basically, we already have this requirement, it's just not in the IMC.
The city.
The city
has.
The city has it.
County doesn't.
Yeah, I would think.
So that's something to go over for the next meeting. And then I guess I assume we're going to have to make adjustments in the IRC.
Correct. If we put it into the IMC, we would want to mirror that in the IRC as well.
Whenever we get that.
Right. Hopefully, but before next meeting. And then the second document in your packet is the proposed amendments from Mr. Hollander. So thank you for forwarding those. We received them yesterday, so we wanted to distribute them to you today.
Having spoken with Dennis, I understand, I went in and took all the wording of the changes. The new ones that Dennis has provided provides much more clarity rather than going into a bunch of wording that can confuse people. So the one that Dennis has submitted is the one that I think should be considered. Mine was just trying to help out and I got a little too far into it. So I don't know that we need to look at that.
So
I think
you're basically withdrawing this, we're going with what Dennis has proposed.
yes, I'm with Dennis. I agree with what he's proposing. The wording, the extra wording is not needed. I think it can be more confusing. It is in the NEC. These are the amendments to the NEC, so I think we should stick with this. And I'm in agreement with everything he's done here. It was the same as what I did. So at this point, I'd like to withdraw that.
So scratch that second document. And Dan and I will work together to get Dennis's proposed amendments into a document for you to review at next meeting.
And there's a third item here about exit stairways.
Correct. So the third item is an emerging discussion item across the country in a number of different jurisdictions related to residential buildings, multifamily that have a single exit stairway, sometimes referred to as point access blocks. The example that we've seen is that they're very, very popular in Europe, in other countries, and there's a certain push to relieve the need for two stairways in these multifamily buildings. So We've been doing quite a bit of research to try and see what other jurisdictions are doing and to dig through the code language. The city of Seattle has had this on the books for, I believe, the longest, since the 70s. But they have a very long list of criteria in order to meet the allowance to use this. The city of New York also has this on the books, and a number of other cities are now kind of picking up the pace. I selected the city of Nashville's amendments because they were the most concise. So it basically is just easier to read. The city of Seattle's document is quite a bit longer. So this amendment package summarizes the point quite well. So we wanted to get this in front of you just so that you're aware and for your consideration if you're interested in also trying to follow suit with this trend that we're seeing in other cities.
Okay.
Most specifically, as a kind of an overview, buildings up to 3 stories in height, residential buildings up to 3 stories in height are already allowed to only use a single exit stair. So what we're really talking about is buildings with 4, 5, or 6 stories also being allowed to use a single exit stair under certain conditions, which are spelled out in these amendments.
Okay, so I mean, this is an issue, but the ICC isn't addressing this.
So the folks that have pushed this proposition forward in a number of those cities did make a proposal, and they were heard in the Orlando committee action hearing 1. So it is going before the ICC, but it does not appear that at this point they will get into the 27 code cycle. So
Has there been push to do this from developers?
I have not been aware of any proposals in Tucson to do this, but the city of Tucson is definitely interested in being progressive in making sure that we meet all housing opportunities. And if this is a barrier to producing housing, then we want to make sure and address it.
Probably the biggest impact is in high density development. Like New York, we don't have much of a footprint, and so that eats into your rentable area and drives up the per square foot cost.
I just keep thinking that, so you're having to go, it's okay to go up 4 or 5 floors, stairs to get to your apartment. That would be tough.
I think really what they're really trying to do is a combination of 2 things. Number 1, reduce the footprint area of the building necessary for egress components to increase the potential area for habitable space. So having that second stairway basically eats into their habitable space. And number 2, the other primary argument is the cost of building the second stair. I haven't personally found that to be a viable argument because one of the criteria that is in the city of Seattle and Nashville is that single stair is pressurized. So I'm not sure that they would reduce the cost of their building by pressurizing their 1 stair and reducing, having to build a second
They
stair.
have to have backup power and everything.
Right.
Yeah, that'd be a big deal.
So that
So
it's
it
quite
may
an
not be
expense
as
to
much an economic
pressurize.
argument as it is a square footage argument to save.
So from the research that
After
I've seen
spending
so
that
far.
amount of money, you're gonna have an elevator in the building anyway for
True.
daily use, I think. But
Well, okay, so the only other comment I have would be if it's over 3 floors, or 3 or 4, you're gonna probably need to have a standpipes. So without those exits, their standpipes are just gonna be then in the corridor. If they're interior corridors, they'll just be, they have to be somewhere, right? So if you have interior corridors and we just go with one exit. So that would be the only other thing I could think of.
Which is a very valid point. So the committee action hearings in spring where this item was heard by the ICC board, the City of San Francisco Fire Department proposed a number of modifications, and one of which was wet standpipes specifically in a protected area.
So maybe like the elevator core gets a wet standpipe and the stair enclosure. But then you'd want that to be so many feet away so that you get the coverage.
Right. So, and that's why I have a tough time thinking that we're actually going to get past the point to get it into the 27th code cycle, because they're still working through a number of those discussions.
Well, one of the arguments is they've been doing this in Europe for years, but they don't build in Europe like we build in the States.
Right.
So
Very true.
that has to be taken into consideration.
I'm just thinking if there haven't actually been developers pushing to do it, do we need to go through all that if ultimately it's gonna end up, say it doesn't hit the 27 code, but it hits 30 code? I know that seems like it's very far off, but we'll be there. And then it'll just be in the code and we, in the meantime, we'll have that. If a developer had proposed to do this with without a local amendment and went the building official appeal route, could they still manage to get it through saying we're gonna do it like Nashville says to do it? Would that be a way that you could work with it, or is that too far away from the basic code rules? And short of an amendment, we really should have an amendment that would allow this type.
So that would currently be the only way that they could do it, is through an appeal process. But I wouldn't be in a position to say that that appeal would be approved until we see what was submitted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a pressing issue with Tucson. I mean, New York, number of people per acre is significantly higher.
Somebody just have to have a really tight site where they want to build high. That's the other thing. Where do we have
Right.
zoning where you can build that high? That'd
Well,
be
that's the
only
problem. I
place you
mean, this is basically a suburban community.
Yeah.
Relatively low density. It doesn't pay until you have extremely high density and every square foot counts.
Yeah.
Not a big pressing issue in Tucson.
We'll be sure to get that on the agenda for the next meeting.
All right. So we're down to the call to the audience. Got an audience of 2. Any last parting remarks?
agenda items for next time, same, or where do we go?
For next time? Well, hopefully we'll have the residential code.
Yeah.
We've gone over the building code, existing building code, pool code, and the electric code. And staff has some minor something to do there for those. What we lack is the residential and energy code. Hopefully they're ready, and if they're
May or
not,
may not.
if they're not ready for next month's meeting, do we postpone the meeting?
Well, for the building code, my only thought was, I know Brent had lots of issues last time we were around. I don't know if he had any this time, or whoever is gonna take his place, if they have any items that they wanted to go through with that, so.
And my only comment on postponing the meeting would be we're inching closer to the end of the year. And I would just like to make sure that we're maximizing our time to the best of our ability. So any of these other items that we've discussed today and so far, if if we could continue to make progress, I think it'll help us ease the pressure as we approach the end of the year.
If we can't get the IRC, we still have structural issues. I hope we'll have a structural member and Brett can get that person up to speed for the next meeting
For the IBC.
for the IBC. Or at least we can put that first on the agenda for the structural issues and then the IRC and is even available.
And we'll be sure that the city of Tucson has draft amendments to match all of the comments that have been made so far. So that you've got both the county and the city amendments before you.
Okay, well, since Brent Woods will be a county employee, he can still attend this.
Yeah, he can
meeting with
still
staff.
attend, he's
Okay.
just not on board.
Yeah, my concern is somebody's coming in cold,
Right, right.
trying to get up to speed.
I think that'd be really good if you could
And
give us any input.
I've already committed to Grant that he will be attending.
Okay. He'll just be sitting over here.
Yeah.
Instead.
So motion to adjourn? Second.
Second.
10:50
Any
a.m.
opposed? And we are adjourned.
Very much.
August 13th is the next meeting date.